At this symposium, a group of us academics and practitioners and people who are directly involved at the UN have come together to have a conversation about the present state of international human rights and particularly Indigenous peoples' human rights.
I think the symposium is timely. It marks 10 years since the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples was passed in the General Assembly of the United Nations in New York. It's a good time, I think, for Indigenous peoples to come together to discuss what progress, if any, has been made.
The university, UBC, is bringing us together from different universities, but also practice of Indigenous rights and human rights, to gather our thinking on what are the most cutting-edge issues that we should be thinking and writing about and advocating about today.
The workshop that we held in Costa Rica brought together scholars from across Latin America, from Argentina, Peru, Brazil, Canada, and the United States, and examined the intersection of human development and the quality of democracy.
Knowledge and the truth is very powerful, and this is where universities and colleges play a very important role with young students globally. It's a place for learning, it's a place for understanding the dynamics between peoples and nation states, and in this case, Indigenous peoples and democratic states, and what the nature of that relationship is.
Power hits the heart of the matter. States control power, they're not going to relinquish power. There's a lot of talk of democracy and human rights, but democracy is also what holds that power.
We've identified the need to center Indigenous forms of self-determination and Indigenous understandings of self-determination, which do differ in some important respects from the way self-determination has been envisioned as a nation state with a territory. So we are pushing the limits, as it were.
This is such a moment in history that we live in right now, because our world has so radically changed. We all feel it, it's palpable.
The question used to be, how do we make global human rights institutions better? Today, the question seems to be, are they even worth saving? And so I think that's in large part response to the types of politics we see in the US, in Europe, maybe even in Canada to some degree. You know, how do these institutions survive, and should they survive given today's political climate?
We're motivated in part by seeing events around the world like Brexit, the election of Donald Trump, the rise of right-wing populism, the erosion of democratic governance in many countries, alienation, a sense of anger and frustration on the part of publics who feel that politicians are engaged in games that don't connect to their lives. They feel less and less represented.
I was one of the co-organizers of the workshop on global rights and democracy, and today I was one of the co-organizers of the workshop we're holding on legal mobilization and international human rights courts.
What we talked about now is about repression. Like, how does it affect human rights organizations in those countries, and how are they able to still protect those people and go to international courts on behalf of those victims?
I will offer my perspective on Russia, using Russia as a case study. And I'm very happy that we are discussing here the case studies from different countries. We've just heard a speaker explaining the situation in Botswana, in Africa, and we are talking about Turkey, about Russia. So it's a really global workshop, and only by learning what's going on in other countries, one can find out actually how similar the problems we encounter are.
This is an amazing group of academics and scholars and people who have worked on UNDRIP and international human rights for Indigenous people for decades, and it's an honor to be included in this group.
Getting together with Moana Jackson and Sheryl Lightfoot and others, it's just fantastic because there's so few opportunities that we have to have these discussions amongst each other.
We sometimes overlook the fact that there's really nothing like actually being in the same room together all day, eating together, spending time together, because it's really old-fashioned, but really the best projects, the best collaborations come from personal relationships. And I think that's the core of why this is important, but also actually the core of why human rights is important, right? We need to recognize each other as people, we need to have a relationship, we need to be able to have conversations. That's the kind of setting where we can overcome some of that polarization.
What we've really identified over the course of yesterday's conversations was the need not only to centrally collect and share our information, but to find a way to easily disseminate it back, not only to us in academia, but also to the organizations that are working, to the communities that are working. How do we make all of these stories and what we would call in academia case studies, how do we make them real and intelligible to communities on the ground that are engaged in these struggles on a daily basis?
Well, I think often that these discussions remain at a very high level. I think that we need to find a way to work with, people on the ground. I think very often our institutions are separated from peoples, and we need to find a way to connect it seamlessly so that people have equal voices, not privileged voices around these circles. So that's what I'm hoping to contribute.
The outcome from the workshop, we hope, will lead to more work being done on these practical aspects of how the Declaration can be put into everyday use, how people in their own communities, on the ground and so on, can make decisions for themselves about how to step forward and claim their right to self-determination.
That legacy bequeathed to us by those who came before is our responsibility to carry on. And certainly my hope is that my grandchildren will be able to lead a different life because of those struggles and the efforts that others have made, and that other communities will take heart from the legacy left by our old people and will pick up in the best way they can the issues with which they are confronted.